Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel, or welcome to the channel if you're a brand new subscriber or a brand new viewer. My name is Kyle. So last week I talked about one of my favorite films, RoboCop, and I talked about it for its 35th year anniversary. I had a great time reviewing that movie. It was awesome, just spectacular entertainment. Certainly one of my favorite films without question. And today I figured, you know what? I want to talk about another one of my favorite films that is also celebrating its 35th year anniversary this year, Predator. And interestingly, Prey, which is a Hulu movie directed by Dan Trachtenberg, who made 10 Cloverfield Lane, is coming out this weekend. I thought, wow, this is actually a rather interesting time to review this film. The film's directed by John McTiernan, who went on to direct Die Hard, and it stars the one and only Arnold Schwarzenegger as Major Dutch Schaefer, the leader of an elite team of commandos who's sent on a private mission into the jungle. What they don't realize is that they're soon going to be the prey to a mysterious creature known as the Predator, which is an alien from space. Predator, similar to RoboCop, is a movie, an R-rated film specifically, that I saw at a young age. I think I was 12 years old when I watched it, and unlike RoboCop and The Terminator and a few other R-rated movies, I saw this film with my parents, and they both love it. You know, it's great when you come from parents, both your mom and your dad, that love action movies. You know, my mom likes it for a very specific reason, but she still enjoys the overall film. But it's one of those movies that I have grown up watching, and as a 12-year-old, I thought about it a certain way, and as a 23-year-old, I still think of it in a pretty similar way, but there's a couple of things that I think a little differently on, especially the fact that I've been to film school. So I definitely want to talk about this movie in depth, and there is definitely going to be spoilers. You've been warned. I'll be talking about this whole film. If you've not seen it, where have you been? This is one of those movies that everybody has to see. Everybody. The first thing I want to talk about is the script, which is something that I think is very, or was very controversial about this movie. Some people who hated this movie, and it's one of those movies that when you look up the critical scores for this movie, especially back in the day, this movie was almost panned, which is just, I don't understand it. And the writers, Jim and John Thomas, I feel like did an excellent job with the screenplay, particularly with the opening sequence. I think what I really like about this opening is the fact that every single cast member has a different kind of wardrobe on. You know, Mac has this big suit, you know, he's a very quiet person, but he seems very professional. Blaine's got the MTV shirt, he's kind of like laid back, and you know he's going to throw some jokes. I like the fact that every person has a different sort of attire, even though they are part of the same elite team of commandos. They definitely have different personalities, and their attire alone showcases that. You don't even have to have a word of dialogue. The manliness in Predator is something that has been talked about to death, but it's one of those things, you can't review this movie without talking about just how manly and macho it all feels. But it never feels dumb to me. You know, these guys are the real deal, and you feel that so perfectly during these first 2 minutes. This is also the perfect time to talk about the music of the film, provided by one Alan Silvestri. When I talked about RoboCop, I described Basil Poledouris' score as something that essentially made the film. It's one of the things that carried certain scenes of the movie because you can really feel the film through the music. And that's exactly how I would describe Silvestri's music with Predator. You feel so many of the scenes in this film based off of the music alone. The performances are great, but the music just adds that extra element where if this movie did not have the score it had, I don't feel like it would have the same effect. There are so many moments in this movie that are highlighted by exquisite camera work, but that Silvestri score just pushes it to that edge of perfection every time. Following this, we get our second introduction to Dillon, played by the one and only Carl Weathers, who was a big inspiration for me. When I was a kid, I grew a mustache because Carl Weathers did it. He was very inspirational to me during my youth, so he'll always be amazing. And we get to witness the greatest handshake of all time. There is no other film that features a handshake more badass than Predator. During the first half hour of the movie, you kind of have that standard action routine where we get introduced to new characters. They go on this mission, they find something they're not supposed to, and that leads them to something even bigger, which is the camp scene, and they eventually have a big fight during there. And what I really appreciate from an action perspective is that we see just how powerful this team is in action. These guys are not breaking a sweat. Even Jesse Ventura with that huge minigun just firing everywhere. It's just incredible. It really highlights the fact that this team is as skillful as they come. So you're thinking to yourself, what on earth could defeat them? The only thing that could is something not of this earth. But what I appreciate even more is the suspense. The suspense of Predator is what really makes the movie stand out to me. Because obviously you can view it as an action movie, and that is what it is. And during the first half an hour, that is exactly the film that they're giving to you. So they're giving you what you want, but they're adding something to it. They're giving you a special layer. This, in my opinion, is one of the best shot movies ever made. Because you can take a location like the jungle and make it extraordinarily boring because everything around you looks pretty much exactly the same. You're surrounded by trees, everybody's going to be sweating. But due to the fact that this movie has such taut suspense and the action scenes are so well directed and choreographed, it allows for the more suspenseful scenes to take flight during the second half of the film, but they're present during that first half hour. There are so many shots in this movie that feel like they're from impossible angles. And what that means is I had a film professor that was talking to us about how to shoot films and how to shoot specific scenes where you want to put the camera in a position that feels like you're intruding on someone's personal space. And it also feels like the kind of shot that is cinematic, not realistic. The cinematic edge in Predator is through an overload thanks to Donald McAlpine. I might have butchered his last name, but thanks to Donald's masterful cinematography, Predator to me stands as one of the best shot movies of the 80s. Predator is one of those movies where I still get chills watching it, and that is a true testament because I have seen this movie well more times than once. But it's the kind of movie where, even though it's not like the first time you see it, where you're just getting that first experience, I still am completely on edge during these sequences. And what I really feel is special is when you try to wonder where exactly the Predator is during some shots. What I also appreciate too is after that half an hour of action, there's still another 10 minutes before the Predator makes his first attack on Hawkins. You're getting through a little over a third of the movie to get to that moment, and I feel like that's one of those elements that you really wouldn't have in a movie today because Predator took its time. It set up the fact that there was an otherworldly being that was observing these commandos, but until it attacks, it's not till that 40-minute mark. While doing research for the movie, I found out it was not nominated for Best Sound, which utterly baffled me. RoboCop was nominated for Best Sound at the Academy Awards, but why not Predator? I feel like the sound in this movie is incredible, particularly after the death of Blaine. Mac sees the Predator, grabs that minigun, and fires over 1,000 rounds into that jungle, and everybody else behind him is firing their guns. The sound is just immaculate during that scene. There's never a moment where the sound effects feel so repetitive that they just get annoying after a while. Everything feels interlocked so well that you don't even think about it after a while. What I also like about the gunfire scene is the fact that we now know the Predator can be wounded because it bleeds.
If it bleeds, we can kill it.
I really appreciate this film showing the weakness of the antagonist because definitely a lot of those horror figures from the 80s were just indestructible. No matter what you did, they always came back. And I like the fact that this is a self-contained movie in which the Predator does die at the end of the film, and you get to see his weaknesses as the film progresses. I also like the character of Anna. I think she provides a good addition to the team. She gives them a little bit of information, but she's scared. And what I really like about it is the fact that she is surrounded by the most manly men in the world, and they are utterly terrified. And I think that's another reason that makes this movie so rewatchable. You get to see these guys that essentially look like gods just being completely paranoid, and you have the toughest guy, Billy, saying,
"There's something out there waiting for us. And it ain't no man. We're all gonna die."
And it leads to the morning sequence featuring one of my favorite shots of all time, where Dutch looks up and realizes that the Predator is using the trees in order to come in through the tripwires. It's one of those great moments that just, no matter how many times I see it, I am just like on the edge of my seat because it is such a great dolly zoom. It's one of those movies where every death should be talked about in some way because the Predator will always do it in a different way. And definitely my favorite death is Dillon. I just love this scene to death. I love Carl Weathers, so it's just great watching him fight till the end. And I love the fact that this scene employs one of my favorite devices, the Dutch angle. Oh man, it is so perfect in this scene. The man has his arm completely severed, and he still is going after this thing. But the one thing that scares the shit out of me is when he turns around and he sees that Predator just sprinting as fast as he can towards him. This is the only time that we see the Predator sprint in the movie. It is utterly terrifying. I like the fact that Billy's death was off screen and all we hear is his scream. But it then leads to what is, in my mind, the scariest moment of the film, where Arnold is all alone and all of a sudden in that background, you hear the sound of the Predator hitting the water. I remember watching it for the first time as a 12-year-old, and I was scared out of my mind. I will never forget my first experience watching this film. He's huddled in the mud, and that shot of the Predator coming out of the water, I have no idea how they got that shot. I know it was on a Dana track, but I don't know how far away they were shooting from. It is incredible. It's one of those impossible angles that I was mentioning earlier, and it's one of those things where you go, where the hell was the camera? From this point until the end of the film, which is another 30 minutes, there was only 4 lines of dialogue spoken. They had to create an almost 30-minute sequence based on the environment alone, and it is utterly spectacular. There is not a single moment during the last half hour of this movie that feels a tad bit long, that feels forced. Everything about it is just natural, and that is really how the whole film feels to me. And we have the final fight, which to me is the only moment of the film that I might have sort of a mixed feeling on. I like the fact that Arnold gets pummeled in this scene. It's one of those things where you saw him as the Terminator and as Commando, which is essentially the Terminator 1.5, in which he never got hurt no matter what he did. So in this film, having him go toe-to-toe with an alien that ends up kicking his ass, it's like, wow, you feel like the strongest guy in the world is incredibly vulnerable. I like that. The Predator's vision is something that is a little bit wonky to me. It's very difficult to tell what's going on during the scene. And there are other moments of the film where the vision isn't perfect. It really is a limit to the time, which is not a bad thing. It's just those are those little moments in an otherwise perfect film that are just kind of little nicks, just little tiny pins in there. Also, is it just me, or is it kind of funny the fact that both Predator and Die Hard end with the guy shirtless, just crawling around? I don't know, maybe it's just me that noticed it, but I just find that kind of funny. Honestly, guys, Predator is one of those movies that does live up to the hype. It is effortlessly watchable, endlessly quotable, incredibly satisfying. The casting decisions, the direction, the writing, the music, the editing, the sound effects, the visual effects, the special effects and makeup. Every aspect of this movie is nailed so well that it almost feels like an enigma. It's one of those movies that we will never see again. And it's one of those movies that I don't feel like anyone quite saw before 1987. And I only wish that I could have been in the audience when this movie came out, because Jesus Christ, this movie 35 years later still kicks ass. And in another 35 years, it will still kick ass. You can bet the house on it. Predator most definitely gets an A+. So what do you guys think about this film? Is it the masterpiece that I said it was? Let me know down in the comment section below, please. In the meantime, do not forget to subscribe to this channel and give this video a thumbs up. All the links to my social media pages can be found in the description box below, as well as my business website, kjgpictures.com, and business email. Both of those can also be found in the description box below. Thank you so much for watching my reviews. I appreciate it as always. Thank you, and stay tuned.
Run! Go! Get to the chopper!